Those of you who are joining us on YouTube. I am excited once again to come and share with you all. I want to say that this message is a difficult one, but if you get through it and you understand it better, you will understand what in the world is going on and how it pertains to everything else that is going on that you don't realize is going on. Okay, that was a lot of confusing language. If you think life is difficult right now compared to the sowing season when it was difficult and you thought it was difficult when it actually wasn't, that's because something is happening, and I'm going to explain that in a minute. So the way that I want you to think about this is direction, okay? The direction you are facing is what is known or what is exoteric, okay? That which can be seen, that which is observable. Height, width, depth, time, five senses, right? Taste, smell, touch, hearing, and sight. What we need to talk about is the hidden. We need to talk about what is not seen. What we need to talk about is what you don't understand about Passover. So, without any further discussion, we're going to move into some concepts on the board very quickly. But one of the things I want to say is that generally speaking, when we are discussing the Gospels being what? The narratives about Yeshua's time here on earth. And of course, John, I believe in chapter 22, I believe it is, maybe it's chapter 21, says, if I wrote down all of the things that Yeshua did while he was here, the scroll would wrap around the world, right? So we know we get a snapshot, we get a glimpse, and I'm going to explain snapshots here in a minute too. But the premise is that we don't really get the whole story ever, not in any part of Scripture. In fact, there are two very important things that you need to know. The first one is the cultural element that was in existence at the time of, say, Moses or Abraham could have only been a cultural element in Yeshua's time if it was taught to the next generation and it was strictly adhered to and honored as a time-tested tradition. And we need to ask whether that's true or not. We need to ask whether or not what we see in front of us today is what they saw in front of them today. Well, there's a few answers right off the bat. We can say no. We can say no, maybe, and we could say yes. Why do we say no, maybe? Well, because some of the things, Solomon said there's nothing new under the sun. But some of the things that we see are patterns of elements of things that we don't understand. So the first thing that we have to do is we have to address something simple. And what is that simplicity? That is that the dragon in Revelation chapter 12 only recognizes and goes in the direction of accusation only of those who have the commandments of God and the testimony of Yeshua. I surmised last week, I believe in my Passover teaching, that if you do not have both, your adversities most likely are not the result of an attack. They're not the result of what we would call pushback, but I'm going to explain that pushback in a minute and how that pushback works and why it works, which is going to blow your mind. When we are done with this message, one of the things that you're going to know is why things are the way they are and how to navigate them, how to respond to them. You know, there's something interesting that actually exists in the realm of economics. And although the Sabbath is not meant for business talk, I will say that there is an ability to increase regardless of the economy. There's an ability to make money even when the economy's bad, and to make money when the economy's good. The wisdom to know the difference, the wisdom to discern when those things are happening, the wisdom on how to apply the techniques is what makes a person elite or a master of economics. Now, the reason why this is important is because when we are working with the paradigm of the Bible, we mistakenly associate a context. That context is something where we start to try to culturally adjust the scripture. For example, there are those who have tried to adjust the scripture to accept their lifestyle, or adjust the scripture to accept their doctrine or their dogma. When the truth is that there are things in scripture that we don't understand. And when I say scripture, I'm saying it from a Christian perspective. I'm saying the Bible, because we all know the scripture is actually the graphe, which is the writings, which is some of the prophets, kings, things like that. You don't realize they're in the writings. You know, Joshua and Judges is actually in the prophets, not the writings. Bet you didn't know that. So when we are working with this idea of scripture, what I mean is a Christian perspective of scripture. In other words, chapter and verse of the entire Bible. Well, when we're working with this concept, we need to understand that there was a culture, and that culture was designed around a belief system that was, from what we can tell, established by Abraham, who was a mystic. He was a Chaldean. He was a magician. And this magician had identified that if there was somebody in charge of this mess, that's who he wanted to work with. And he had concluded that the mess needed fixed. And so he began to make souls. We could get into the depth of the mysticism of that verse that says the souls that he had added when he left Haran and came to Canaan, when he came to the promised land. So the reason why this is important is because you need to understand that the mystical concepts we're going to discuss today were created, or at least were discovered, by Abraham. And he passed it to his children, who had the same mystical abilities and concepts. We passed it to their children, who passed it to the tribes, who passed it to all who would listen. They tried to perfect it, and they tried to manipulate it by trying to work other gods into the mechanism. But in the end, there was an element of truth present in all of the different facets around them. A truth that Paul claims that people suppress. A truth that Paul claims that you can see through that which has been made. A truth, a pattern. You know, I'm going to tell you right now, Paul was not talking about the fact that things had been created, that's proof of God. That was not what he was doing. He was saying that the pattern that we see in front of us in the geometry of the growth of a flower is actually describing the power, energy, authority, whatever you want to attach to the intensification of all power in the universe. Why do I call it the intensification of all power in the universe? Because you can't get bigger than intensifying forever. Do you get that? Do you understand that it's not just some contained power? It is constantly getting bigger and bigger and more intense, and there is absolutely nothing to stop it. Well, that's going to become very important today. So what I would like to do is I would like to read something to you about Yeshua. And very specifically, I want to talk about when he comes down to the Jordan to be baptized by John. Okay. So when we look in Matthew chapter 3, in the NASB 9.5, now, or 95, now in the days of John the Baptist came preaching in those days John the Baptist came preaching in the wilderness of Judea, saying, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. For this is the one who is referred to by Isaiah the prophet when he said, the voice of one crying in the wilderness, make ready the way of Yahweh, make straight his paths. Now John himself had a garment of camel's hair and a leather belt around his waist, and his food was locust and honey, wild honey. When Jerusalem was going out to him, and all Judea and all the district around Jordan, they were being baptized by him in the Jordan as they confessed their sins. But when he saw many of the Pharisees and Sadducees coming for baptism, he said to them, you brood of vipers, who warned you to flee from the wrath to come? Therefore bear fruit in keeping with repentance, and do not suppose that you can say yourselves, we have Abraham as our father. For I say to you that from these stones God is able to raise up children to Abraham. The axe is already laid to the root of the trees. Therefore every tree that does not bear fruit, as bear good fruit, is cut down and thrown into the fire. As for me, I baptize you with water for repentance, but he who is coming after me is mightier than I, and I am not fit to remove his sandals. He will baptize you with the Holy Spirit and fire. His winnowing fork is in his hand, and he will thoroughly clear his threshing floor. He will gather his wheat into the barn, but he will burn up the chaff with unquenchable fire. Now, when we look at this, we are reading it in hindsight. But I want you to think about the religious systems of today and how different John was to them. And what I mean by that is the religious systems of today have lists of dogma, right? They have these bylaws. They have these things, these requirements, these essentials, the Nicene Creed, the Apostles' Creed, etc. Right? The Westminster Confession, I can't remember the other one, starts with an A, confession. The Lutheran tenets, the Episcopalian dogma, the Catholic catechism. Perhaps we could include in there the Jewish Talmud. And if we wanted to get technical, we have the equivalent of that in Islam as well, which unfortunately resulted in some very bad situations in Islam. But we have what's called the Hadith. All of this is oral tradition and dogma attached to and focused around belief systems of how we think it should be versus the actual concrete texts that communicate something very different. Any attempt to apply your life to ancient texts of wisdom will require a cultural adjustment, or will require that to be renegotiated. Those aren't my words, but I can tell you I use them a lot, because the truth is you cannot make Scripture behave to you. You have to alter your lifestyle to reflect what Scripture is. Again, referring to Scripture as the whole Bible, chapter and verse. Now, the reason why this is important is because now you see John come along and challenge the dogma of the day. He calls those who would establish the throne of David again, take the throne away from Levi and give it back to David, right? Who would prepare for the Messiah by creating a fence around Torah so that people were pure, and who would make many disciples that would do the same thing again. That is the rabbinical authority of today. That is the intent of the rabbinical authority today. You know, many people say, how are you a rabbi? Are you an authentic rabbi? I ask the question, am I? And they say, well, You don't have a certification, you don't have an education. I say, okay, well, define for me what a rabbi is. Well, there's somebody who leads a Jewish congregation. By Jewish, do you mean Hebrew? Yes, Hebrew. I lead a Hebrew congregation. Yeah, but that doesn't mean that you're a rabbi. Okay, fine. What is a rabbi? Somebody who teaches Torah. You see, dogma wants to force you into some sort of thing that will make people feel more comfortable. John did the complete opposite of this. So now here comes the Sadducees, the Pharisees. Here comes everybody, right? And they want to what? They want to go and they want to see this person, right? And they ask John, they say, "Are you the Messiah?" I'm not the Messiah. Are you that prophet? What prophet? The prophet Moses said would be raised up in his stead to guide the people through Torah, right? No, I am not. Are you Elijah? No, I am not, right? Because Elijah had to come first, right? Remember, they taught that. This was not some off the wall thing. They believed Elijah would return in the flesh and guide the people to the Messiah's moment, right? Well, let's look at it a little bit different here. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and apart from him, nothing came into being that has come into being. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light that shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. That's going to be an important verse today. There came a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify about the light, so that all who might believe through him. He was not the light, but he came to testify about the light. There was the true light, which coming into the world enlightens every man. Now, down here, this is the testimony of John when the Jews sent to him priests and Levites from Jerusalem to ask, "Who are you?" Do you know why the priests were sent to John the Baptist? Because only a high priest can declare the Messiah. And I submit to you that the high priest at that time, however corrupt he was, did in fact prophecy and state who the Messiah was when he said it is better for one man to die for a nation than a nation for one man, right? And it says he did not speak that of his own volition, but because he was the high priest that year. Now, it is important for you to understand, they come trying to see if John is the Messiah. Why? Why would they think that? Why would they want to know who John was? Because he was drawing the hearts of the people, and it was starting to concern them politically. Well, consequently, John was never a popular character, was he? No, he was not. In fact, he was such an unpopular character that eventually they decided to kill him. Well, they did the same thing to Yeshua. They tried to do the same thing to Paul. And so, I guess that's the company that we keep. But the premise is, and this is important, that John described something about Yeshua that was very, very important. He says, "Behold, he's the Lamb that takes away the sins of the world," right? Not the sins of the Jews, not the sins of Israel, the sins of the world, right? So I think what's important here is that we go back to this verse here in John chapter 1 that says, "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it." If there's anything that you need to understand, if you take, and the best I've found for this is to just go into a closet with a light that's inside that's switchable. close the door, maybe put a towel over the gap at the bottom of the door so that you cannot see any light if you were to turn off the light. And you turn off the light, and what happens? The light flees. There is no more light, right? The light is gone. And what's present? Absolute darkness. Can you feel it? No. Can you see it? No. The truth is you can't see anything. And here's the crazy part about it. We can't see darkness because our eyes are not designed to see darkness. They're designed to see light. Your rods and cones are not designed to reflect darkness, which would be an absence of light. Well, there's an intrigue behind that, isn't there? There's a concept behind that we really need to get our minds turned towards. And that is that how we view the light is relevant. Okay? So when we are working with this model, the way that I want you to think about it is that what is seen is actually the only thing that we can comprehend. What is not seen, we have to think in a very different way about. I'm about to show you. So let's jump over the board and let's get this party started. Let's see what we can do here. So if I take and I have a, that's not the color one. We'll use yellow here. If we look at this for a moment, we identify that this is a light bulb emitting photons via heat energy, right? So the premise is simple. It's about resistance. And when we identify resistance, we understand it better. So what's happening here? There is electricity being passed to this part of the light bulb, and there is electricity. Oh, I forgot to draw that part. There is electricity being passed to this part of the light bulb, and inside of the light bulb is what we call a filament. That filament is a very thin piece of metal that is very strong but very resistant. And what I mean by resistant is electricity passes through it through one side and through the other, heats up, and as it gets hot, very, very, very hot, it emits a photon. Okay? Now, when we're dealing with this in terms of information, we understand that photons, when they are emitted, travel in a certain direction. Let's see. Let's do this. They travel in a certain direction. In fact, they travel in all directions. And because they have no limit to how far they can go, they actually are what we call rays of light. A ray is just something traveling in a certain direction without any limit. Okay? So let's say that we have an object now in the universe. Let's say we use this color. We have an object in the universe. It is a three-dimensional object, a solid that does not allow light to pass through it. Okay? And so as a result of that, as the light is coming from the light bulb, it travels past the object in a path of least resistance. But everywhere around the object, that there is no light. See, there is light here and light here. Why? Because there's light traveling across the perpendicular of the cube down to this point. But this edge right here is blocking the light. Okay? So there are a couple things that are very, very important here when we are discussing this. The first and most important is that this side right here, which I'm going to label, and I'm going to label it something that's going to make a lot of you uncomfortable, is called the dark side. Okay? And the reason for that is because no light is present on the dark side of this shape that the light bulb is shining on. This, of course, is the light side. Okay? The light side is visible because the light is shining on it. But you cannot actually see any light on the dark side. Now, the dark side also creates shadow, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Shadow is very different from the dark side in that the shadow is proof that something blocked the light. Okay? And so the way that I want you to think about this is that shadow is evidence of the cube in the first place. And you know what? We're just going to call this C. I don't want to label this contraction. I'll explain that in a minute, but contraction is basically the reduction of something from a very specific point of view. But we can also call this concealment. For those of you who are a little bit more advanced, you know that this is Simsum, isn't it? Isn't that what the whole of this idea is? So now, why is this so important? What are we working with here? What do we see in front of us? We see actually the very act of creation occurring. All right, so we're going to move this concept over to the back a little bit as I continue to illustrate for you some things. Contraction, concealment, Simsum. So now let's say that I have a source point of any energy. So in this case, we'll go ahead and use this color. Here's our source point of that energy. Now, we're going to do some thin lines here. Now we have, whoops, that's the wrong one. The thin, and now we have all these things emanating out from the source point of all energy, the intensification of all power in the universe, something that can neither be created nor destroyed, only transferred. And as that energy is coming out, it's not asking any permission to come out. Let me make this clear. There is a concept that you do not understand about the intensification of all power in the universe. One that is another uncomfortable thought, and that is that it does not ask permission to be in existence. It does not ask permission to emanate. It does not ask permission to propagate. It does not ask permission to create. And it does not ask permission on what rules it sets for its creation. That is what we know as what's called the sovereignty of God. However, in order for it to relationally interact with its creation, after it has the initial desire to bestow, the initial desire to give only give. Yeah, I want you to think about an entity that does not have the ability to diminish. And a pitcher that would never run out of water and is constantly overflowing. So even when it's pouring into another, it fills itself back up, defying every possible rule we could think of. Defying buoyancy, right? Because the pitcher's turned sideways and it's full. Defying all of the things that pertain to our physical universe. Doesn't ask permission to do those things. But what you need to know is because of that fact, there is no way that a creation could ever receive without it being force. And so what does it do? It creates a reduction of its everything. You don't understand. I illustrate these things with lines on a board, but we are talking about it actually dialing back its entire existence as a consciousness, as an energy that is, you can't diminish it. It doesn't run out. And it is the ultimate activity of authority. Snap of the fingers of thought, and we just start over, or maybe not at all. Maybe that's it. Maybe the desire to bestow actually is taken away, and there is no more desire to bestow, and therefore creation just stops. I want to tell you, at that moment, you understand how insignificant you really are when you realize that on a whim, you just cease to exist. And you can't get mad about it because existing is why you get mad. If you didn't exist, you wouldn't care. And people have the nerve to say, oh, well, that snuffing out is so cruel and indifferent. You know what? It doesn't matter. He doesn't care. And what I mean by that is that if that's what it wanted to do, it would, but it doesn't. And so what we need to do is understand there is an ultimate magnitude of benevolence in process. Well, the only way for it to bestow its benevolence upon something else was to make a place where something else could exist. Because the magnitude of existence itself is based upon the idea that it is not itself. This is where we get the idea of contraction. Okay? So now, the way I want you to think about it is it creates something that causes it to not be it anymore. I know that sounds confusing, but the way that I want you to think about it is kind of the way you dial back your speech or your actions towards your children. You have a 3-year-old, you don't talk to them as if you're giving a quantum mechanics lecture at a university. They barely understand sink and float. They know how to potty, eat, and sleep. And so you have to speak their language, right? You have to dial it back. You don't say to a child binomial nomenclature. You say, this is that animal's name. But that's what binomial nomenclature means. That other name for an animal, or the scientific name of an animal. For example, dog versus canine. Canine has to do with the binomial nomenclature, but you don't say that to a child, you dial it back. Well, in the same way, that's kind of what had to happen here. And so I want you to understand that the first process, the first implication is a denial of self, the ultimate, if you will, death of the ego. Not that the intensification of all power in the universe has an ego. In fact, ego is an offspring of what I'm about to show you. But the premise is the ultimate denial of self. Probably a very painful moment for itself. Okay? And that comes in the form of a shield or what we call a screen. In fact, I'm going to make this blue. I don't know why I'm going to make this blue, but I'm going to make this blue. A shield. And what does that shield do in that moment? That shield absolutely denies emanation. You will not pass, right? That's the premise there. You won't come any further than this boundary. Who created the boundary? It did. But once it created the boundary got a mind of its own. And that mind of its own is exactly what the it wanted in the first place. The intensification of all power in the universe wanted something that would choose it. So we can very easily label this free will. Free will. But it is also the negation particle, right? It's no. No. And it says, you will not pass. You will not come in here. You will not come to this place. Right? Why? Because the first thing had to be a denial, or what we would call a concealment. A concealment of what? Let's talk about truth for a moment. Yeshua comes on the scene. Who is Yeshua? A emanation of Yahweh through vibration of what? Torah. Emanates into a fleshly being and becomes the example that it actually wants us to honor. It being what? Torah. Torah itself becomes flesh and dwells among us. No, tabernacles among us. A hint to his birth, but also a hint to the power behind the Feast of Sukkot. But here's the intrigue. It, in its process, says, I am the truth. I am the way, the truth, and the life, right? That's what it says. So what? Truth is a person. But here's the interesting part. It is concealed from us. The full truth of reality and existence is concealed from us. And so the first instance of the existence of creation does not know that this exists. It doesn't know that it's resisting it. And there is a layer of mercy placed upon, let's see, color do I want to do here? I think I'm going to do this color. There is a layer of mercy placed upon that entire circumstance to where you don't need to know about this gap here. You don't need to know about this negation particle. All you need to know is that there's an emptiness and a longing for something that we don't know. And so there's a crying out, and as that crying out occurs, then it asserts itself across that boundary into a single point of existence. All the information here is here, but concealed. And what do I mean by concealed? I mean you can't see it. So here's how I want you to look at this. This is just like this cube. This moment of thought for the intensification of all power in the universe, the ultimate eternal consciousness that we would call God. This resists it. Resists it. Okay? Now, here's the power behind this. If you are on this side of the universe, let's see, how will we indicate us? What shape should we use for us? I think I like this one. No, this one. Here we are on this side of the universe, looking at this as what? We can't think about it. We can't define it. We can't put it in our box. So we dismiss its reality and try to work with this. But the problem is that we're on this side of the universe looking at it. We can't see this. So all we do is say, this is God. We don't understand any of this. But what we don't realize is that an observer on this side never sees what's here. Because the truth is if this is 100% magnitude of whatever it is, this has to be less than 100%, which means what? There's a minor, little bitty, itty bitty bit of imperfection. And as this views this, it becomes aware of that imperfection and desires to rectify, but it can't, because if it does, it becomes this. Then we start all over again. Which means what? Within the contraction, there has to be a boundary, a minimum amount of reduction, or what we would call contraction, or for those who are learned, tsimsum. Now, the reason why that's important is because then we realize something had to block the light in order for there to be a reduction of light. That's how it works. And so when we accept that, we start to understand how that boundary works. So an observer looking at the light from here does not know about this. All they see is this magnitude. But an observer, see if I can get a hold of this thing. Oh, I can. Cool. An observer on this side of the universe is not going to know anything about this, but only about this. And so what you need to understand is what we observe with light. I want you to think about something. If you are staring at a light bulb, okay, and you think to yourself, I can see the light from all directions. Let's say we have a light bulb hanging in the middle of a room. If I turn this way to see the light bulb, I still see light. You see, what's behind that light bulb, I can never see, because once I turn this way, there's still a behind. And that behind has something that I don't understand, because that behind is concealed. And even if I go all the way around to the other side of the light bulb and look at it, it's still emitting light. I can never see the concealed side with these eyes. That is exoteric. That is where what we see is what we get. Every object in the universe has some sort of color, from black all the way to white. White being a full reflection of light, black being a full absorption of light. And when we look at those objects, no matter where they are, they have a color as a result of an absorption of light. which means you're still looking at light. You can't see the concealment. You can't see the concealment behind the curtain, so to speak. That is the power of the veil. So, what I want to show you is what you can't see. Okay? Right. So getting back to the board, because I know you guys don't like looking at the back of my head, let's create our timeline that we know so well, that I repeat for the sake of those who have not seen before, but we'll just go ahead and I don't know, I really like making the timeline points green. I don't know why I do. So here's our 3 points. What are these 3 points? This is the feast day season in its entirety. Contained within the feast day season is the season of reaping. Season of reaping, right? Contained within the feast day season is Passover. Contained within the feast day season is Pentecost. Contained within the feast day season is Tabernacles. Every able-bodied man who is in covenant with Yahweh is supposed to make their face to come before the face of Yahweh at Passover, at Pentecost, and at Tabernacles. They are not required to do it for Yom Kippur, one of the most important days of the year. They are not required to do it for the feast of first fruits, which consequently is the day of resurrection for Yeshua. They are not required to do it for the day that was the outpouring of the Holy Spirit, both upon the people of Israel at Sinai and the people of Israel who were in Jerusalem after Yeshua had ascended. They were not required to do those things. But here's the crazy part about it. This season of reaping is not necessarily about harvesting abundance, but is the season of everything you sowed one season ago. Let me explain. Let's say we begin our journey at the sowing season, which is after Tabernacles. What you put into that season, what you sow into the universe, does not get reaped until it has gone through the balancing process. What do I mean by that? It will not be available to you until after it has gone through the scales. Scales of what? Yom Kippur, in which the books are open and the works are judged. And on Yom Kippur, the book is sealed again, and everything that has been determined as part of the reward or consequence of actions of sowing is sealed. You don't reap that season in the sowing season. That's a new sowing season. And remember, there is a temptation to not sow. Remember, that's one of the biggest things that you have going on during the sowing season is temptations to not do the right thing. But then we come into what is known as the wilderness season, which is the beginning of the sowing season. Of the reaping season. And then you will reap whatever Yom Kippur determined for you. Now, what's important about that you need to understand and know is that the general outcome is not pleasant. Why is it not pleasant? Because you have done everything in your power to defy the living God. You think you haven't, but you have. Whether you are Torah observant or not, I promise you that you had a lot more to confess at Yom Kippur than you think you did. But there's a pass on that. Because why? Because you did the best you could, I would hope. But now it's time to come into the sowing season. The reaping season. We've passed out of the sowing season. In fact, as Passover rolls over, and the feast day season begins, you step into the reaping season and out of the sowing season. The result is an uncomfortable one. It's what? It's a diminishing in physical prosperity. It's a diminishing in mental strength. It's a diminishing because why? Because in general, you have probably done worse than you did good in your past life. In those past days of last year of sowing. So we're looking back at almost 2 years of information, which is nothing to the intensification of all power in the universe. But as we come through this, we arrive at a very specific set of adversities. Hunger, thirst, and fear. Now, it is important for you to understand hindsight is very, very, very dangerous when it comes to Torah and to the writings and to the prophets. We read the book of Isaiah, and we hear all these crazy prophecies, right? We read about the falling of towers, and we read about the judgment of an economy, and we read about all of these different adversities that fall upon the Israelites as a result of their disobedience to God. And we have the nerve to think that doesn't apply to us because we're reading it and it already happened. But do you think that God actually changed his mind? You are wrong. He never changed his mind. He never said, oh, you know what? Since it just seems like these people are never going to get it together, I guess what we're going to have to do is modify my rules. Let's just look back for a moment at this. There is nothing bigger, stronger, smarter, more intense in magnitude than the intensification of all power in the universe and its sovereignty. Don't think for a minute that it said, oh, well, that didn't work with the humans. Let's go and let's adjust this thing. Tell you what, why don't I just throw this new covenant in here and we'll make that adjustment? You're not thinking straight. You don't understand that when Abraham was present, he saw Yeshua and rejoiced. Not documented in your words. Sorry, it's not when Isaac was up on the mountain. That's not when he saw Yeshua. It's a different story. That's not in there. But I can tell you, Yeshua said, Abraham saw my day and rejoiced. What day? The day when he would alter the universe. A day that goes all the way back to the beginning. Listen, if you are a Jew and don't believe in Jesus Christ, you need to understand that the rabbis already teach that the light of the Messiah transcends all time and space. So if you just take Yeshua and supernaturally overlay him upon that definition, Yeshua transcends all time and space as the light of the Messiah. There is no other light. This is the light spoken of in John. But now watch this. We come into this season of hunger, thirst, and fear. And what do we say? God brought us out into the wilderness to die, right? What will we drink? What shall we eat? Who will protect us? They just had the Red Sea collapse upon the Egyptians. They come into the wilderness and all of a sudden they're scared of the Amalekites. They come into the wilderness and all of a sudden they think that they're not going to be provided for, that there's not going to be food, that there's not going to be a drink. So the wilderness season has the pattern of hunger, thirst, and fear. Now, does that appear? Listen, a lot of people who study the wilderness season under me think that this is about some sort of adjustment to your bank account. Not necessarily. But it is an insatiable desire that needs to be satisfied, that can't be satisfied by anything that's present. They had cattle. So what was it they really wanted to eat? I propose to you that manna did something else to them that was not present in food that they could consume. And I propose to you that the reason for that is because of where it came from and what it represented. Man shall not live by bread alone, but every word that proceeds out of the mouth of Yahweh. Now, what's important to understand about this is the transcendence of it. The transcendence of it. The transcendence of it is contained within the actual season itself. And that occurs here. And it occurs as a response to the wilderness season, right? Okay. So there's our recap. We know all this, right? We know this is an octave. Look at this. There's a feast day season connection all the way through. In fact, I shouldn't use that color. There's a feast day season connection that's all the way through. And this is an octave of it. And this is an octave of it. Now, it's important for you to know that in addition to what I just showed you, we have one other element we need to pay attention to, and that is that there's a moment when this changes. When there is an upward swing and there is an alteration in its process, and there is also a downward swing and there's an alteration in its process, and contained within the feast day season is a balance. Not too much of this, lest we what? We steal and cause God's name to be cursed. Not too much of this, because if we were just totally rich, we would forget our hungers and no longer desire the intensification of all power in the universe to pour into us in the first place. This is a doubling of this frequency, which means these are harmonies. These are octaves. These are harmonies. So, what then we need to ask is, what are we actually looking at? I don't think people realize that an octave is simply a doubling. If you have a keyboard, let's go ahead and illustrate this way. If I have a piano, I have keys that are black, right? And then I have keys that are white. And those keys that are white are natural sounds or pleasant sounds, and those keys that are black are half sounds or half tones. So people say, okay, yep, this is C, this is D, this is E, this is F, this is G, this is A, this is B, and this is C. From this point to this point is one octave. Okay? An octave is a doubling of a frequency. For example, if we were to keep going with our keyboard, this is what? That's C, right? And here's our black key. There's D. Whoops, I'm doing this backwards. Here's our black key. That's D. Here's a black key. That's E. This is F. We'll keep going here. Let me go ahead and get rid of this line. We'll keep going here. This is then going to be F, G, A. So if we were to keep going, we would say C, D, E, F, G, A. Now I know that's a little bit off, but you're going to get my point here in a minute. From this point to this point is an octave. Okay, it's what we call it, an octave. But really what it is a doubling. This is A440. 440 hertz. Okay? And this is A880. 880 hertz. That's on your keyboard. You go get a toy from the thrift shop. Go get a toy from the thrift shop. You get this. But what you don't realize is that there is an octave in existence between the 9th octave and 40 octaves later of information that we cannot comprehend. And what I mean by that is that we go from sound to light, but we don't realize it's the same vibration at a different octave. Light is on the 49th octave. Now, why is that so important? Because then we understand that this is all about frequency. When I say a doubling is an octave, that's what I mean. Which means what? It's light slowed down enough that we could hear it, or possibly in between the place where we can't see it or hear it. But what we do know is that somewhere here in this spot, I think I'll put it over on this side. Somewhere here in this spot is what? The light of Passover. Now, here's what you don't understand. The light of Passover was not activated at Passover. The light of Passover was activated when the lamb was slain. When the Messiah came into existence is when the light of Passover existed. Rabbis teach this, but they don't teach that Yeshua was that light. So rabbinical authorities come along and they say all of the light of the feast days is in the light of the Messiah. And then they say it affects everything before and after, but they don't understand why, and I'm about to show you why. You see, the concept here is based upon the original principle. That is not the right one. There we go. That original principle of the light bulb, right? So the original principle of the light bulb has what? Light going out in all directions. That's the light of Passover. However, there is a concealment. A concealment you can't see. Just like I said, when you are facing a light bulb, you can't see that on the other side. And you assume there's light there because why? Because why would there not be light there? And if I go look on this side, I'm still facing the light bulb. All I see is light. So I prove to myself, I convince myself, I lie to myself that that's actually what's on the other side of the light bulb. Because why? Because it's impossible that there could be something else. But what you don't realize is the only side you can see is the only side that has light. That's proven in quantum mechanics, by the way. Now, so the premise is that there's actually a contraction within the feast days themselves. That contraction is there for a very important reason. And guess what? There's a contraction on the other side as well. You see, when we get to this side, let me illustrate this for a moment. Let's see if I can't dial in this knowledge a little bit for you. When you are on this side, looking this direction, you see the Passover and you miss its light. But what you don't realize is that you have stepped into the concealment. And I'm going to get back to that in a minute. But what you need to understand is that's for your safety, because if the light of Passover was given the opportunity to activate in the intensity that it actually can, you too would die just like the firstborn. And I propose to you that there was a concealment created within the nation of Israel in Goshen when they put the blood of the lamb on their doorposts. You see, they were given the instruction to do something that had already been done to the universe, but they were doing it because they didn't understand the concealments. Now, the reason why this is so important is because what you're going to start to understand is why the light is dialed back. Okay? You see, the reason why the light wants to do that, the light of Passover wants to do that, is because he made him who knew no sin to become sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God. The intensification of all power in the universe breathed an instruction out to the universe. And that instruction, through its manifest power, became flesh and dwelt among us. And what did we do to it? You see, there's an avenger of blood pursuing us. Every single human being who causes a failure of an activation of instruction has created a void that is insatiable. How do I mean? I mean that there is literally black holes sucking light out of the universe as a result of the hardening of your heart. You are destroying the world from within, and guess what? There was nowhere for the light to go. It just kept filling and filling and filling and filling because you would not shift gears into the state of becoming like God and equally distributing. And I'm going to show you that in a minute. But the premise is that as you move through this concept, you need to understand that you became this insatiable, malevolent, energy-sucking thing within the sowing season. When you were like the rich man who should have sold all that you had and given it to the poor. You focused your energy on the selfishness, the fears, the anxieties, the ego trips. And you owe, because what Yeshua did was he created a place for the light to dump into so that you would not be malevolent, that the righteous requirements of the law would be fulfilled in us who do not walk according to the flesh, but according to the Spirit. You see, there was somewhere that malevolence needed an outlet to pour into, and he created it in himself by contracting one more time. But you see, I will remind you that the final contraction has no other light. In other words, he became the thing that would receive all of the extra stuff you're not supposed to have because you decided that you wanted to be scarce in your thoughts. You wanted to be wounded in your processes, to feel entitled to things you're not entitled to. And so we have a concealment on this side, and we have a concealment on this side. I'm about to prove it to you. One of the most important things that you need to do as you work your way through the information of Torah is you need to realize that it is the focal point of the Gospels. It is the focal point of the prophets. It's the focal point of Paul's writings. It's the focal point. There is no topic more discussed in any given Abrahamic faith than the law of God, than the Torah of God. It is very important for you to understand that when we are working with this model, you can't afford to have the thinking that you've had in the past. One of the biggest reasons why, I'll get you guys this verse in a minute, but one of the biggest reasons why is because of the concealment. In a minute, you're going to understand everything about the concealment. You're going to see why it exists and what it is. You're going to understand that it is satisfying something, that if that thing was not satisfied, you would be destroyed. Because there's an avenger of Yeshua pursuing every single last human being, because we crucify the Son of God afresh. We continue to put a purpose in the universe that would cause him to have to become void. Remember, it says he emptied himself. Emptied. Right? He emptied himself. I read that to you last week, but I'm going to read it to you again. Therefore, if there is any encouragement in Christ, if there is any consolation of love, if there is any fellowship of the Spirit, if any affection and compassion, make my joy complete by being of the same mind, maintaining the same love, united in spirit, intent on one purpose. Do nothing from selfishness or empty conceit, but with humility of mind regard one another as more important than yourselves. Do not merely look at your own personal interests, but also the interests of others. Have this attitude in yourselves, which was also in Christ Jesus, who, though he existed in the form of God, did not regard equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself, taking the form of a bondservant and being made in the likeness of men. And in the Greek, this reads, laid aside his privileges, right? But the Greek word itself has to do with the idea of emptying. Now, in fact, let's just look at that real quick. Let's confirm that that's true. So it is the word kenu, Strong's. So kenu comes from kanos, which means to be empty, vain, or devoid of truth. So it is an emptying. So this idea that he laid aside the equality with the form of God, all that stuff, let that go. It actually means to be empty. And I'm sure that if we went into the Thayer's lexicon, we would find that in contemporary writings that was true as well. Let's see, let's go back to the root word real quick here. And let's see what we got. Let's see. Yep, here we go. Well, I don't actually see, oh, here we go. Yep, they're right there. Homer, the Iliad, is putting it as an emptiness, but he emptied himself. Come on, guys. If you can't get the concept that this is talking about the Kabbalistic idea of Tzimtzum, you're not getting it. You need to understand this is the contraction. But why did he do that? Because there were these malevolent beings consuming without giving. And so he made a place to pour the extra so that they would not destroy the universe with their hungers. That's what we call sin, by the way. Did you know that the word sin itself in the Latin actually means there is not? And is similar to the concept of the word ein in Hebrew, which means there is not. So if I say I have a dog in Hebrew, I don't say I have. That doesn't work that way. What I say is there is to me a dog. Okay? And so the way I say it is yesh, there is, shili, to me, kelev, a dog. Yesh, shili, kelev. There is to me a dog. There is for my sake a dog. Okay? Now, if I say there isn't a dog, I say ein shili kelev. There is not. That's what sin means, without. S-I-N means without or non-existent. So now you see the emptiness. Now you see that pouring in without ever giving and therefore becoming a malevolent being. Remember, there's a reconciliation that it has to occur. Well, Yeshua is that reconciliation, the balance of the malevolence, which is going to come during Passover, and I'm about to prove it to you. Now, before we go too much further, I want to discuss what happens after Yeshua is baptized, okay? And the way that I want you to think about this is that there is a time before Passover that has a concealment attached to it. And if we look at the chronological processes of the Gospels, the next thing on the prophetic timeline, as it were, is going to be Matthew chapter 4. Then Yeshua was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. Now, let's talk a minute about this. We try to single Yeshua out. We try to single Jesus Christ out. We try to single out the Messiah as having some sort of power that we don't, having some sort of knowledge that we don't, having some sort of privilege that we don't, having some sort of ability that we don't. But if you do that, he cannot be the perfect sacrifice, as it were. Now, I know in times past I've explained to you that you don't actually have the word sacrifice in Scripture. That is a pagan thought, that you have to satiate a God. Go watch How to Satiate a God. That's a video series, probably about 2023, I believe, maybe. But the premise is, and this is important, that you realize that if he could not be tempted and deny that temptation, if he was not capable of creating the malevolence himself, he could not offer to the universe what he offered. Meaning what? He could not become sin for us that we become the righteousness of God. He had to have the ability to be tempted. Let's read it. After he had fasted for 40 days and 40 nights, he then became hungry. So let's talk about this. He goes straight. Look at this. Look, he's baptized here. He's baptized here. Chapter 4. Then Yeshua was led up by the Spirit. Now we do know We do know that actually the temptation may have come after the wedding at Cana. But what we do know is it had to precede a very specific thing, and it had to follow a very specific thing. So we have the baptism or mikvah of a righteous one, right? Who did not need a mikvah. Temptation of one who does not need temptation. Why? Because they're not reaping what they've sown. Remember the mechanism of temptation? The mechanism of temptation was based upon Yom Kippur. If you sin a sin, you go to Yom Kippur and repent. When you come back around to that season, you have to be tempted, because until you overcome, you are still in the season of that sin. And then once you have overcome, then the next year around, a reward comes. After Yom Kippur examines your works of overcoming, it has to go through the machine. It has to go through the mechanism of judgment. But the premise is that now you've come around to the other side and it's time for you to be tempted and overcome. He had no sin. He knew no sin to be having a temptation come to him. The mechanism violated the rules. Why? Imputation. I'm telling you, there is no more powerful theological discussion you could have with any person who has a doctorate, who has a master's, who is divinity, who is studies, who is mystical. It doesn't matter. They could come from a Buddhist transcendental meditation, and imputation is one of the most powerful subjects you could possibly encounter, because it means that you can't do anything about it. He did it for you, and however selfish that was, he got away with it. And I can tell you, in that process, you can't do anything to reverse it. It's yours. And so the intrigue is that that's what we're talking about. When we talk about temptation, you need to know the mechanism did not follow the rules. Because why? Because it was creating what would eventually become imputation. No need for a baptism, had a baptism. No need for temptation, had temptation. No need for a death, had a death. But now this is very important. You need to understand a full revolution of Yom Kippur had to occur before it was time for his death. But the next thing that happens after this is the clearing of the temple. Let's read it. Then Yeshua was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. And after he had fasted 40 days and 40 nights, he then became hungry. And the tempter came to him and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, command that these stones become bread." But he answered and said, "It is written, man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God." Then the devil took him to the holy city and had him stand on the pinnacle of the temple. And he said to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you, and on their hands they will bear you up, so that you will not strike your foot against a stone." And then he said to him, "On the other hand, it is written, you shall not put the Lord your God to the test." Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said to him, "All these things I will give you if you will fall down and worship me." And Yeshua said to him, "Go, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God and serve him only." Then the devil left him, and behold, angels came and began to minister to him. Okay. Chronologically, the next thing that happens is Passover. Now, he has to travel from wherever he's at to that point. We don't understand. We don't know what all happened before he goes to Passover. But I can tell you this season is right before Passover when he is tempted. Because there had to be a full year revolution from Passover to Passover. He clears the temple. A Yom Kippur comes. He clears the temple again. He's put to death. Now, it's very important for you to understand this mechanism that's operating on your behalf. Because if you want to understand why the wilderness season happens, why the wilderness season happened to the children of Israel, why the wilderness season happens to every generation from the beginning of time until now, you will gain much wisdom in realizing that it is an avenger. And I'm about to prove it. There's a system of infestation, and there's a system of process when it comes to the power behind the enemy. Now, there are some things that you need to realize. The first one is that if you're going to assign attributes of the enemy and call it Satan, the devil, and Lucifer, then you need to accept three very important facts. He is not omniscient, does not know all things. I don't care what you think you understand about that entity, it does not know all things. Number two, it is not omnipresent. It cannot be everywhere at once and does not have that kind of network. It has to focus and concentrate its energies on very, very specific entities. For example, Hitler or Judas. It says Satan entered Judas's heart. What you don't realize is that Judas actually was one of the most obedient creatures of all time. He gave you what you have today because he was willing to go and betray Yeshua. Be careful how you think and judge others and their mechanism of process. Yeshua said, the offense has to come, but woe to him who brings the offense. The offense has to come. I know I have to be betrayed, and it's one of you, but I love all 12 of you equally. He knew. But now, so here's the thing. The third thing is that he's not everywhere at once, does not know all things. What else? He's not omnipotent. He actually has zero power. It actually has zero power. Now, you're going to understand in a minute how all this works. But the premise that you need to start to get your mind wrapped around is that this is not what you think it is. Now, James, author of the book of James, most likely the James who counseled Paul to go into the temple and sacrifice after Yeshua had died, that James. The same James that said Moses was taught in the synagogue, so we don't need to obligate the Gentiles to all of the law at once. Let them learn it and choose it for themselves, because that's what the point behind the Tzimtzum in the first place. He understood the contractions. You cannot force a person to keep Torah, and if you do, they will hate it. Yahweh will never obligate you to keep Torah. In fact, there's not even a threat of duress. There's just a removal of protections. Think about if we have a contingent of security guards and they're moving a VIP, and all of a sudden they just peel away and some guy comes up and cuts them up. What happened? His protection was pulled away. That's all that happened. He no longer had the security. And what? Who told the protection to leave the VIP in the first place? That's what you do. You say, I don't want your protection. I don't want your provision. I don't want your instruction. Okay, let me pull back then. I will do exactly what you asked. And then we get bent out of shape when we're like going through something, right? We're like, hey, what did you do? Why did you do that? You told me to. Okay, so now, James, this is what he says in chapter 1 of his book. In chapter 1 of his book, who was written to whom? To the Israelites, to the 12 tribes specifically. That guy writes this. He says, "Blessed is the man who perseveres under trial, for once he has been approved, he will receive the crown of life, which Yahweh has promised to those who love him." Whoa. Okay, so let's talk about this for a minute. This is the mechanism of Yom Kippur. This is the time where you overcome the temptation that was a sin the year before, right? Let no one say when he is tempted, I am being tempted by God or from God. For God himself cannot be tempted of evil things, and he himself does not tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when he is carried away and enticed by his own lust. Then, when lust has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And when sin is accomplished, it brings forth death. Do not be deceived, my beloved brethren. Every good thing given and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shifting shadow. In exercises of his will, he brought us forth by the word of truth, so that he would be a kind of first fruits among his creatures. So that we would be. Okay, now, what does this mean? That means Eve was led away of her own lust. That means Adam was led away of his own lust. That means Yeshua was led away of his own lusts. The tempter cannot be both. It can't be that James says, oh, this is how it is, and Eve has an external tempter. It can't be that Adam is tempted by the fruit to eat the fruit by some other thing. It has to be the thing who what? Who desires it in the first place. So Yeshua's fasting. He's hungry. Okay, that makes sense. Come on, you know you can make this bread. That's all you got to do. You know you can make this bread. Now here's the intrigue. Is this the accuser of the brethren? Absolutely. Absolutely. But understand the mechanism of temptation was not a result of guilt. The mechanism of temptation was the result of imputation. Remember, it says he made him, created him, who knew no sin. Remember, sin is what is conceived when desire is entertained. You may look at a woman. You may even identify desirable things within her. But until you start to contrive a way to have her, there is no sin. But the moment that you start to contrive thoughts of having her, there's sin. And the same goes for you women, who I don't understand, and so I can't speak upon. But I can tell you that every single person is led away of their own hungers. Hunger. It's a mechanism. It's a mechanism contained within you. The avenger of Yeshua, contained within you, who brings you into the wilderness season, desiring to have discipline as a result of what you sowed. It's there. It's present all the time. And unless you are in your identity, your mind can't do it. You have to choose to be the righteousness of God, which is an equal distributor of the light. And if you are a distributor of the light, you need to understand something. There is only one distributor of the light. Let me show you that. The intensification of all power in the universe. One of my goofy students identified this as I Intensification of all power in the universe. IAPU. The premise is that I may have actually misspoken on that, but the premise of this is there is nothing higher, smarter, stronger, more benevolent, more able to know everything from the beginning to the end. Why? Because it has already thought of it. So if you are the concealment, then you are not like him, right? You are not doing the things. You see, when you become the righteousness of God, you become the only version of this that exists in this realm. You need to understand the purpose behind Yeshua coming was because there were those who have this information and exploited it. You need to understand that once you realize that there is no limit to the level of abundance that could be poured into you, and you exploit that abundance, Yeshua becomes necessary. If you are the righteousness of God, that means you equally distribute the light, which means you have unlimited light. So what happens when we start pulling back and not equally distributing? Oh, what a fearful thing to fall in the hands of a living God. You don't understand. You are being pursued by something that wants to avenge Yeshua because you have exploited what he did. And so as a result of that, there is a determination. The universe becomes obedient to that judgment that's right here in your mind. So you either become the righteousness of God as a result of no merit. I don't care you could have done the most horrible thing that I could possibly think of, and I can tell you that would be pretty bad. Or you could have done the most awesome thing that I could possibly think of, and that would be pretty good. And it wouldn't matter. It would not matter. Because your identity as the righteousness of God has nothing to do with your ability to do anything. All you have to do is just be it. Because you are it. And every time that you don't be it, you are denying it, and therefore everything is obedient. Oh, yeah, okay, you don't want it? Okay, cool, let me pull that back. Let me pull back that production. Oh, you're not worthy? Okay, right, you actually aren't. Let me go ahead and punish you. And who's doing that? Who's deciding those things? You are. This is the ultimate renewing of the mind, because now you realize that the wilderness season is here because you actually can't stand yourself. You hate everything that you are, and therefore you have to step into hunger, thirst, and fear. Oh, but there's something really powerful happening, isn't it? The light of Passover is very near, very, very near to the wilderness season, which means what? Manna is coming. Water from the rock is coming. Protection from your enemies is coming. But guess what? You are going to curse God first to prove that you can never merit that imputation. Because there always has to be that little bit of imperfection. Or what? You're the intensification of all power in the universe. There is always a concealment. So what's the concealment on this side? The attack. Let me explain it. Here's how it works. Yeshua is in the wilderness, and now what? He is in a situation where, and remember, this is his own mind doing this. This is not some separate entity, according to James, unless James, listen, you want to tear the book of James out of the Bible, you go right ahead, and that is how we'll deal with this. Or you can accept what James is saying and apply it to this and realize the magnitude. He was tempted without sin. He was in all ways tempted, but did not sin. You need to understand the level of the magnitude of that truth. He stepped into judgment that does not exist in his brain. For your sake. For your sake. So that this could not avenge the way it wants to. This would destroy you, annihilate you. You would cease to exist as matter, as energy, as anything, if it had its way, because it is so angry with the fact that the intensification of all power in the universe, spoken instruction, then instruction eventually became flesh, showed us how to live. And we won't. Okay. So here it is. First thing, Yeshua sees the stones. What's the doubt? Are you the Son of God? Am I really the Son of God? If I am the Son of God, I should change these into bread, right? Oh, there are so many people getting angry with me right now because they want that devil there so they have somebody to blame. But they don't understand that Yeshua had to put himself through this for your sake to prove that sin could be overcome. And there were three. Watch. So he says, okay, here's the adversity. I'm hungry. Here's these stones. These stones are not bread. I can make them bread, but I will not convert these stones to bread. And some people in the mystic world say it was the stones that Joshua set up. I will not convert these stones to bread because I am not supposed to live on bread alone, but every word that proceeds out of the mouth of Yahweh, which I am. I am. So much so that he says, this is my body broken for you. Snap. Here you go. Eat that. Why? Because you need table fellowship with my Father. You need to be able to sit back down at the table and be in favor with him instead of being the child who's been banished, which consequently is the child who banished himself. But you get my point. Now, in all of that, you need to understand the mechanism here is circumstantial. You get hungry. You get thirsty. You get cold. You get too hot. The systems in your body that are designed to regulate all of those things will cause you to want to move towards a relief from those. You get hungry, you start to salivate, you're hungry, I want a steak. And for those of you who don't like steak, you can have a Vegemite sandwich, right? But the premise is the same. There is a insatiable need to fill the void. And what does Yeshua say? What does the Torah say? The Torah, standing in front of everybody before this temptation, by the way, right? If you look at the chronological Gospels, right? If you look at that chronology, he does the Sermon on the Mount first. Now, there's some people who would disagree with that. But look at the temptation, because I can tell you as a preacher, as somebody who speaks speaks Moses on Shabbat since ancient times, you get tempted with whatever you speak. What I'm speaking today, I will be tempted with next week. And it's just that way, all the way through. And the more you believe my words, the harder that is, which means if I say something to you, I better believe it, which means it's a very difficult test, a very difficult trial of, do I believe what I just said? Will I live it? Because I'm telling everybody else to, I better be willing to. Oh my gosh, does it get hard sometimes? So circumstantial, hunger, thirst, arousal, etc. appears to be just life happening. But if you accept that the moment that you are quote unquote led away of your own lust, you are outside the mechanism of give, receive, give, receive, give, receive, then you'll realize that you're creating a place to put the things that you never intend to share. Which means what? It is sin. It is a void because it will become insatiable. You feed a hunger in an inappropriate manner of believing that you're the one feeding the hunger and not the intensification of all power in the universe feeding the hunger, and understanding that it is the Yeshua that is actually eating, the Yeshua that is consuming because he's the poor or he is the least of these, then you understand that the two mechanisms within you that are doing the process is the intensification of all power in the universe pouring out and the Yeshua within you receiving. Then you understand that that becomes an inappropriate creation of a solution to the hunger, which will result in insatiable desire, which will result in sin, which will result in death, which will result in a circular, cyclical process of reset that eventually is infestation. Watch how it works. So circumstantial life things, your car breaks down, the tire blows, this, that, the other, you view as happenstance, as life just happening. You either embrace the suck or you blow off the suck, or you just go through and throw a fit and do everything else, but in the end that is still present. But the wise ones will know that this is the beginning because of the season. They will know it's the beginning of birth pains, as it were, because something is coming. And they say, oh no, you know what? That does not reflect my tithe account. That does not reflect my obedience to Torah. That does not reflect my obedience to the food laws. And they name it. And they make a judgment upon it. But it all happened and started here, and the universe is just being obedient to it. So now this happenstance happens. Somewhere along the lines, I may have said, you know what? I hope that person's car breaks down because they're speeding and being dangerous when I was just doing 150 on the highway the other day. Guess what? My car's going to break down. But the premise is that what does that is the mechanism in my mind that creates that judgment. Now watch this. This is very important. Once you recognize it, then the ugly thing is not afraid to hide itself anymore and is revealed in the light. And what happens? It drops. It actually drops in and says, all right, here I am. You're right. That wasn't just a flat tire. It is your darkness, and I am here, and I am your darkness. And boom, will hit so hard and so fast that you will just be knocked flat on your butt. And here's the crazy thing about it. You cannot be defeated. You can't be knocked down. You're the righteousness of God. But you can be tricked into believing you're not. And that doubt can cause you to do things that you should not do. And as a result of that, then what? Not only are you not like God because you're no longer benevolent, but as you step into that malevolence, it manifests as this ultimate energy sucker. Your rage, your depression, your decadence, your pride, your insecurities, your entitlements, your tyranny, your bullying, all comes out in that moment. And in that moment, as that exposure occurs, and you don't call it for what it is, and you justify it because of something that happened to you when you were 5, or because your boss didn't give you the bonus that he gave the other guy, or because this situation happened, or that situation happened. Now you're justified to be evil. And in that moment, when you are doing those things, you do not recognize the enemy, who is you. and you blame everything else. Of course there's a devil now. Of course you can label Lucifer and put a pitchfork in his hand and put yellow or put red pajamas on him and have a pokey tail, instead of accepting that you're the enemy of God in that moment, and you're the one led away of your own lusts, and you are the one who manifests this darkness because you what? Because you were willing to identify that that flat tire was a result of you judging yourself. Now the worst is going to come out of you for that moment. But if you overcome it, something happens. It is very intriguing. It is actually one of the most powerful truths that anybody could ever understand. And if you accept that there's some entity out there who wants to destroy your soul and drag you to hell, fine. But you need to understand, you recognize for who it is, and the next thing he does is crazy. What did he do with Yeshua? He said, you back off and I'll back off. This is called the deal. I will make a deal. This is the crossroads demon, right? I will make a deal. I will sell my soul so I can have this prosperity. Your brain will say, okay, I will compromise my very principles if I could just have some relief. I'll leave my wife. I'll abandon my children. I will consume myself with a bottle. I will do the unspeakable for the sake of one moment of peace, not realizing peace is coming. Hindsight's 2020, right? These guys were hungry. They didn't know manna was coming. But see, this was the temptation of Meribah, and according to it, there were only two who did not suffer the consequences of a Meribah. In Psalm 95, it says, I was angry with that generation for 40 years. What generation? The generation in Meribah. This is like the waters of Meribah for me, which is what? The test, the temptation. What shall we drink? What shall we eat? Who will protect us? Not this guy. He brought us into this wilderness to die. Before the answer was ever even coming, they already determined that he was not worthy to protect them. And that's what we do. That's what we do. We step into this action of, well, if it happens this way, I'm going to be very angry. Oh, really? You who could be snuffed out like that, and your life is absolutely meaningless to begin with. You understand, you cease to exist. It's an injustice to your brain. You think, it's not right that that person took that person's life. But the truth is that that person's life actually has no meaning. Because once they're gone, they're gone. It's our loss that causes us to want to avenge it. And it was the universe's loss that causes it to want to avenge Yeshua. It's not right that everything has to dump into him. All the malevolence has to dump into him so that there's somebody receiving. Because we just won't do it. So, now you understand this over here becomes this mess. Because why? Because it is a concealment of something very powerful that you cannot see, which is how powerful the light of the Messiah actually is and who it was given to. All of his light emptied into something. What? You. And whether you name yourself as a Jew, as a Christian, or some other thing, the light of Passover is supposed to be a mechanism of you. Because he made him who knew no sin to become sin for us, and we might become the righteousness of God. You need to understand that the light that was present in Goshen, that was not present in Egypt, where darkness could be felt, I don't even want to know what that is, was the light of the Messiah. Dying some 1,000 years later, coming upon them in that moment, giving it to them. And yet they walk into the wilderness and they do this. So what you need to understand is there is an attack on this side and there's an attack on this side. The attack is just, but understand you're creating it because you're not dwelling in the right merit. You see, there's something out there. There's something out there that cannot come to you because you will not accept that you cannot affect the outcome. You want to be in control. You want to blame the devil for your mistakes, and you want to be rewarded for every little thing you do good, when the truth is you do horrible things. You humans do horrible things to each other. One single moment of sarcasm can destroy a person forever. One single act of deviancy can traumatize a human for the rest of their lives. One single moment of betrayal can destroy a person's soul. That even if they were in a state of full healing and of light, they were light workers, they were people who just spewed light, there would be that little tinge of wondering if they would ever be betrayed again. Always. And would have to be overcome every time with what? He made him who knew no sin to become sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God. So why is this occurring? Why are these concealments here? Why are the feast days an entire concealment? Because if you knew the light of the feast days, it would terrify you. Light does not play. So you are either going to be in the abundance of the light as a result of something that has nothing to do with your merit. It's not because you paid your tithes this year. It's because you have a purpose and you are enabled and you are valuable as a result of existing in the first place. Because if you weren't valuable, you wouldn't exist. Simple. But we can't do that. We can't look in the mirror and say, boy, if you knew who you were, if you knew what you could do. Instead, we look and we wonder whether or not there's an ounce of beauty within that piece of glass. We wonder if we will ever be amazing. And we are plagued with the doubt of it. Life circumstances that manifest in your reality, that are uncomfortable, that hurt, that feel like a betrayal, that feel like you're not being protected. You're not. You're not, because you said you didn't want it. And however much you believe that you did say you want it, you did not demonstrate it because of one simple fact. Love your neighbor as yourself. You have been trying to pour into and pour into and pour into, and the truth is only one of the only reasons why a human being would do that. Let me tell you this, and this is Rabbi Q making a confession as much as it is a teaching. The only reason why you give anything and do anything good and not do it to yourself is because you are actually just stroking your ego. You're trying to make yourself feel good about all the dark things that people don't know. Wrong reason. But if you demonstrate to the universe that you actually want what you're giving to others, oh, would it get scary here? Ooh. It would get scary. If you gave for the right reason, you would have so much. And your proof in giving for the right reason is that you equally distribute. Listen, the righteousness of God is an equal distribution of wealth. Well, guess what? Some of that wealth is supposed to go to you. And here's the funny part. is we will get in this funk where we will say, oh, you know what? I deserve this thing. I have worked hard and I have a right to experience the pleasure of this thing. I'm going to buy it. And you don't realize that you are actually activating scarcity, because the truth is you're not doing it for self-care. You're doing it because you think you're entitled. And here's the crazy part about it. You're not. And since you're not, now there's an avenger wanting to come take that thing from you. I told you it was a scary message. You need to understand the attack is designed to conceal the light of Passover. When you are in the straits, you will not look for the light. But you need to understand, Yeshua went through it all. He went through the circumstantial. He went through the haymaker, right? The big one, the hit, right? Which was what? If you're the Son of God, then you have privilege. Activate it. Throw yourself off the temple. Everybody will see you bored up by the angels, and they'll know you're the Messiah. And you won't have to go through all this stuff. They'll just believe it. The priests will see it and believe it. Everyone will see it. Throw yourself off the temple into this crowd of people. There's over 100,000 people in the temple sometimes. Throw yourself down, and they will all see you bored up by the angels. And they'll know you're the Son of God. One of the things I want you to see in this is the last attack. The last attack. And look, I'm just using Matthew here just because it's convenient. You can look at them all. You can look at them all, right? But look what it says. Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said to him, all these things I'll give to you if you fall down and worship me. There's a couple things very important here. Does he say, if thou be the Son of God? Nope. Why? Because it's all out on Front Street now. He already did the big punch. He already did the big temptation. The worst of Yeshua came out in that moment. But he did not sin. So now, I'll back off if you back off. All I need you to do is compromise this single thing, and I will give you every single last kingdom that I have infested from beginning to end. Let me show you the infestation. Remember the cycle of Israel, right? The cycle of Israel. Let's just go through it real quick. So we have these 4 quadrants. There are these transition points in each one of these quadrants. Okay, up here we have death or winter. Right? Here we have resurrection. And spring. And here we have summer. Oh, my bad. Sorry. I switched to the wrong camera. Here we go. Summer. And we have what? We have maturity or fatness. Right? And here we have what? We have entropy or breakdown, and we have fall. I don't know why I'm putting parentheses. I didn't put parentheses on only the other one. Fall. And what do we have? We have a moment in which we transition from obedience. Okay, so let me explain this. From this point to this point is not done in your own strength. And that includes the deliverances. Why we're dealing with death here is because there is no actual process that you're making a decision to be a part of. But from this point to this point, it's actually a choice of obedience. So this is choose. right? This is the point behind the negation particle in the primordial consciousness of the intensification of all power in the universe. And what is this? This is where we begin to forget about God. And as we move from here to here, we start to move into something called lack and decrease. But here's the powerful part. Here, at this moment, is what? I'll back off if you back off. But what's really happening? What's really happening here? Compromise your principles, compromise what you believe, compromise what you learn and have been teaching, compromise what you claim that you are, your integrity, your fidelity, your trust, your happiness, your joy, your energy. I want you to give one of those things up. You give one of those things up, and I will stop bothering you. And in that moment, it becomes an infestation and eventually here, a possession. In fact, let me mark these, and let me mark these in a nice contrasting color so that you get it. Yeshua's entire ministry could have been corrupted by this process, right? What's next? Oppression. What's oppression? Is it actual possession? No. Oppression is where it is trying to convince you that you are not the sovereign one. It's trying to convince you that you need an external locus of control to make sure that you actually are doing what you're supposed to do. This is when a man who has tried and tried and tried to overcome pornography comes to me and says, I want you to monitor me. I want you to hold me accountable. That's external locus of control, that's oppression. But this is just proposing it. This is saying you can't control yourself. You can't be sovereign in your life. You can't be someone who has dominion. And then boom, next is possession, which is what? You no longer have your own will. Those malevolent entities within you that have the insatiable desire become the voice of reason, become the psyche, become the intent of the heart. But you can't stand not experiencing this right here, that power, the light of Passover that caused Yeshua to pop up out of the grave. You long for it, you desire it. And so then you what? You cry out. It's all here. So what's the infestation? The infestation is I'll back off if you back off, but you need to know you don't get to be a warrior of the light. You cannot draw that sword, and I won't draw mine. And thus continues humanity. But it's a concealment for what you actually should have. And that's the light of Passover. But see, as we move into this point and observe Passover, looking back at it, we don't think in our minds that that light of Passover is actually influencing us. We are back in the concealment because this does not appear to be the light of Passover, and this does not appear to be the light of Passover. The light of Passover is poured into those who have have transcended this and this. This temptation is designed to defeat you so that when you drink the cup, you don't think you're worthy. This temptation is designed to defeat you so that you will not look back at Passover and think that just changed the universe. And I am the one who should receive. I am the one who should have the abundance because I am the righteousness of God, which means I am enabled. And if you are righteously equally distributing the abundance of God, you probably get some of that, right? Why would he not give a servant who was his steward of distribution a portion? And I will propose to you that that portion is going to come if you don't let this be your reality. This is an illusion. Hunger, thirst, fear is an illusion. You do not need food. You do not need water, and you do not need to feel comfort. But he wants you to, and I promise you, he will give it because you are becoming an equal distributor of his wealth. And so we come into a very difficult moment in this discussion, and that is to transcend this. You have to believe that it actually doesn't exist. And that's very hard to do when you have an empty stomach, as Yeshua knows. It is very hard to do. I want those stones to be bread, but he wouldn't do it. And the reason he wouldn't do it is because he knew if he changed those loaves to bread, you don't get to have what you have right now. The temptation of Yeshua is so powerful that if we really understood the mechanism behind it, I don't know how to explain this, but to put that every lack and decrease is motivated by the fact that he gave you everything and you don't receive it. I kid you not. Every time you have a deficit of some sort, it's actually because somewhere along the lines you rejected the light. And I don't think you all are ready for that yet. I don't think you're ready for that moment when you actually curse God because you don't like how something's going in your life. And then a year later, something bad starts happening to you and you curse God again instead of going, oh, that's when I rejected it. I didn't say this was easy. I never claimed that this was going to be a happy message, did I? And I never claimed that this was going to be a happy thought. It's not a pleasant thought. You are led away of your own lust, but that is a result of your mind not believing that you're the righteousness of God, because you wouldn't lust if you didn't realize that you already have. You already have it all. That's not some name it and claim it stuff. That's because what Yeshua did at the grand scheme of this thing is imputation. And if you can't get your mind wrapped around imputation, you have no business being a Christian. Substitutionary sacrifice is an understatement and an inappropriate way to express what actually is happening. You get to sit on the throne because he chose not to. That's right. You get to be equal with God because he chose not to. It was not something that he had to attain to. He was equal, but left his estate and emptied himself in the form of a man. Baptized when he wasn't unclean, tempted when he had not sinned, murdered for all of the sins of the world, so that he could become an empty vessel for all the malevolence that is not giving to pour into. It's like he went along and poked a hole in every one of the malevolent beings, and all that stuff started dumping into him. That's the power behind this. That's the majesty of this thing. That is the crown that you receive. Listen to what it says in James again. You can't get past this. Blessed is a man who perseveres under trial, for once he has been approved, he will receive a crown of life, which Yahweh has promised to those who love him. A crown of life. You know, I don't even know what that means, but I know it has something to do with a full stomach. Because that's what Abraham's culture understood. And that's where all these promises and this mechanism comes from. Because the truth be told, Abraham was somebody who should not be investigating the intensification of all power in the universe. Abraham should be doing his dark arts and worshiping his planets and doing his stuff. Now, don't get me wrong, there's correspondence. I am sure that we are definitely in a state of darkness at the level we are, because we will not open ourselves to any other guidance but our own logic. Manoah is sitting there kicking it at his threshing floor, burning the chaff, and an angel pops up out of the fire. Hey, dude, you're going to have a son. He needs to be a Nazirite. Make sure he doesn't drink. His name's going to be Samson. He'll deliver the people. Manoah didn't go, campfires, angels, not really a thing. He said, I don't know if I believe you, right? But here's the premise. He interacted with that as if it was a guide, as if it was, you don't understand. Mary, right? Mary talking to Gabriel. All of the different times when there are correspondences with angels was because the people allowed them to be a part of their guidance. Look what happens when Yeshua is done with his temptation. Matthew chapter 4 again. Then the devil left him, and behold, angels came and began to minister to him. And how much more valuable are you? Because he was actually doing all of that for your sake. Because we are a little bit lower, right? A little bit lower. Why? Because we've been given dominion. We've been given instruction to judge angels. We've been given opportunity to overcome the dragon, as it were, blah, blah, blah. But you need to understand, your worst accuser is not some guy in some red pajamas with a pitchfork and a pointy tail in the 7 rings of hell, or 5 rings of hell, whatever it was. It's you. You're the one creating the deficit that is rejecting the system that created the imputation that give you the opportunity to be whom you are. Not who you think you should be, not who you wish you could be, not some future person, not who you want people to think you are, but who you already are. A distributor of the wealth of the intensification of all power in the universe, who is not only enabled, who is valuable because they exist, who has the ability to wield the light of Passover, but is too caught up in the trials that bookend the light of Passover, that are a concealment of the light of Passover, except for those who have eyes to see. So, I want you to understand, when it says the devil left him, here, let's just do something real quick. Let's just do something real quick here. Diabolos, prone to slander, slanderous, accusing falsely. Diabalo, from dia, which means through, and balo, which is to throw over, across, or descend over, right? Let's look here. To throw or let go of a thing without caring where it falls. Slander is something you just throw out there, right? Dia means to go through. So a slander or a thing that is thrown out there that passes through you, right? Accuse, defame, etc. This is not a context of some external entity. Oh, let's see if we can take it a step further. Let's go back here. Now the serpent was more crafty than any beast of the field. What is the Hebrew word for serpent? It is the word for nachash, which comes from what? The practice of divination, divine, observe signs, learn by experience, diligently observe, practice fortune telling, etc., right? But watch this. It is not the serpent itself, but the sound it makes, or the vibration it has. Okay? Now, I want you to understand what I'm saying. I'm saying that there wasn't something talking to Eve. Eve was talking to herself. And I need to make perfectly clear that doesn't necessarily mean that there isn't an entity that is formed as a result of all this malevolence in the world that is manifest as a result of that. But what I am saying is that Eve was led away of her own lust, or James is a liar. And if James is a liar, rip out that book. And there's a lot in that book that you like to use. A lot in that book you like to use. And I will propose to you that you need to also rip out Acts chapter 15, Acts chapter 21, and the Transfiguration, etc., etc. Anything where James exists, because it's all a lie. Yeah, you're not ready for that. You're not ready for the idea that it is actually you that is causing the damage. And if you knew the horrible things that you actually do on a daily basis to damage hearts, to damage souls, you would understand the necessity for the meritless imputation. Why was Yeshua tempted when he did not have a Yom Kippur action against him? He hadn't done those things the year before to be tempted again. After he was baptized, he came up out of the water, was driven into the wilderness. Now, we don't know when he actually went into this state of temptation. He could have, during those 40 days of fasting, done the Sermon on the Mount. A harmony of the gospel says that the temptation of Yeshua came and then Passover. And what did he do during Passover? He takes and he sits down and he crafts a cat o' nine tail. Metal, glass, stone in strips of leather tied and braided together. Experts in the subject, whoever they may be, have determined it takes about 3 hours to build this. So he sat for 3 hours preparing to clear the temple. For 3 hours knowing what he had just gone through, the temptations he had just gone through. And then he goes in and with the cat o' nine tail drives out the money changers, drives out the keepers of the animals, overthrows the tables, and Passover begins. And he goes through a whole year cycle and comes back to the Passover and becomes what? Him who knew no sin to become sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of Yahweh. You need to understand the equal distribution of wealth is what the word righteous in the Hebrew means. Some of that wealth is yours, but you don't want it because you don't think you deserve it. Because somehow, somewhere along the line, somebody told you you were naked. But it's truly, actually your construct. You know what I found? I've found that those who have been victimized are more destructive than those who have committed the offense when it comes to healing. It is harder for somebody who has been victimized to heal than it is for an offender. And one of the biggest reasons is because they convince themselves of the identity. Don't get me wrong, everybody needs their identity fixed on both sides of that coin. But I can tell you the wounds are deeper and they are more psychologically ingrained as a result of accepting it as true instead of rejecting it and believing that you're the righteousness of God. That is a very uncomfortable truth for me. Don't get me wrong. There's plenty of offenders who do not want to change. But I have not yet met somebody who was victimized who wanted to change. And I will propose to you that that's a scary thought. That the people who need the healing the most reject it the most, and the people who need the forgiveness the most accept it the most. That's crazy. Don't get me wrong. Everything, all change is a process. But what I'm trying to tell you is that if you have been wounded, you need this identity more than the one who wounded you. You need this truth more than the one who said, you are not worthy of me not beating you. You are not worthy of me not treating you with respect. You are not worthy of those things, and you believed it and you became it. And then that one who said you're not worthy went along and all of a sudden came to a change point in their life and realized that they are the righteousness of God and they want to be the light. And guess what? They just said, whoop, and changed. But you over here still believe that you are not worthy. What a lie. What a horrible, horrible lie that you believe, that you've convinced yourself of. Again, if you are the righteousness of God, then you are a strong mind, which means you are the light. And the light, what? When it's present, creates order. But if you don't believe that you're the righteousness of God, then you have a twisted mind. You are evil. And if you are evil, then you are an enemy of God, which means not only are you going to hurt his sheep, but you are also going to continue to create a reason for Yeshua to die, which means an avenger of blood is pursuing you. Okay. So let's talk a minute, real quick, about reaping and sowing, because we're coming into the reaping season. Remember, you take a peach pit, you drop it in the ground. A tree grows, has hundreds of peaches on it, thousands even possibly on it, right? Takes a while, but you get there to that moment. What does Torah say? One peach for one peach. You drop the seed in the ground, it was malevolence. That means one unit of malevolence is going to come into your life to balance. The whole tree goes into Yeshua's pot. The whole tree. The whole tree of malevolence that you should be reaping because of the ripple effect. Excuse me. Because of the ripple effect that you've created with your darkness. You have no idea what you've done. The ripple effect that you've created. You should eat all of those peaches, but all of those go into that pot, and you have one. Now watch this. Let's say it's a righteous seed. Let's say it's an equal distribution of wealth. You get the whole tree. You get the whole tree. One single seed of light, and you get the whole tree. One single act of benevolence, you get the whole tree. And then you turn around and you cancel it out with your guilt, your shame, and your feeling like you're just not worth it. The whole tree. Well, I'll just take a peach because I'm not worthy of the rest. Okay, fine. Then guess what? A peach is all you're going to get, buddy. So stop trying to scratch the lottery tickets. Because a peach is all you want? Fine. I remember I met a guy who said, well, I know there's mansions in glory, but I'm content to just have a cabin. Okay, then guess what? That's it. That's all you get. So when people are over here with all of their prosperity and all of their amazing things, you get your cabin and you better be content with it because that's what you chose. That's what you chose. Remember the parable of the talents. This guy says, I was scared of you, and so I put your money in the ground. This guy says, you know what? You gave me a certain amount, I doubled it. Here it is back. Here's your interest. You gave me an amount, I doubled it. Here's your interest, right? I believed that I could make something out of what you've given me because I believe that I am a worthy servant. I'm not afraid of you because why? Do you want to be unafraid of authority? Do that which is good, and you'll have praise from the same. Romans chapter 13. And so when we are working with malevolence, we understand that it is the result of a belief that you do not deserve what you have, and therefore you believe it will be taken away from you. A scarcity mentality is a belief that you somehow merited it. You need to understand that's the point behind all of this. We are trying to repair the world, and we've been enabled to do it, but you have to start with you, repair you. What do I mean by that? I don't mean go see a shrink, right? I don't mean go see a psychiatrist or go to PT. I mean, you need to believe that you're more important than what you do. Not more important than others. Remember, it's equal distribution. So the next time that you pour into another and you do not allow yourself to be poured into, you are a liar. And I would propose that you are also evil. And I would propose that you have rejected the light of the Passover. So don't expect nothing but this. And I will propose that you will have none of this. And you'll have a whole lot of this. In fact, the golden calf will probably be the first thing you do. You'll enter into Yom Kippur yet another year with a golden calf. Mark my words. You need to adjust your thinking. You need to stop thinking, why is this happening to me? I must be a horrible person. When the truth is it's probably happening because you think you're a horrible person. I'm just saying. So, understand, if you're facing the light, all you see is the light. You don't realize the concealment behind it that is there preventing you from actually seeing what you need to see. And when you realize that there's a concealment on this side and that light is actually not the true light. You know, I had this time that I spent climbing 14ers. And specifically, I climbed Mount Harvard, which is the third highest mountain in Colorado. And as I was climbing it, you see the top and you're getting towards the top. And as you come up over the hill, there's another top. So then you're like, okay, there's the top. And so you're hike, and there's another top. And then you hike, and there's another top. There's 4 false summits on Mount Harvard. That means you cannot see the top. It is concealed. You cannot see it from the bottom. And when you get to the place that you thought was the top, there's more top. What's my point? There is what you think you see of the light of Passover. There is an avenger built into the light of Passover who started with the Egyptian firstborns, but has been working its way through time exponentially. And here's the crazy part. If you think for a moment that I'm talking about something that goes slow, you're wrong. It's a thought, and it's always been a thought. And in its simplicity, that's what it was. That's what it started as. It's what we don't experience it because it's way slowed down, but it's just a thought. And that thought is, if you're going to reject what it is that I'm offering to you, even though that I am saying that I care about you, even though that I'm giving you the greatest instance of benevolence I possibly can by getting under you and allowing you to be as powerful as the Creator, I will get under you. I will come under you and elevate you to the position of God. And as I elevate you to the position of God, then you will have abundance and prosperity and amazing things. Remember, he said to Moses, I will elevate you to a position of God. You will be God to Pharaoh, right? And the premise is that in all of that we say, no, you know what, I did this thing when I was 12, and I'm a horrible person. Okay, fine. I'll take it back then. I'm not going to push that on you. Somebody once said, God is the ultimate gentleman. Yeah, in a lot of ways that's true, but you know what? It's even worse than that. Because when you want it later on, you don't get to have it. It's too late. Until you go through the mechanism of Yom Kippur again. And Yom Kippur sees that you had lack and decrease, and so it needs to balance it with abundance. That's the short version of this. But you need to remember the possession, the infestation, all of those things, right? You need to remember this concept right here. This infestation is what? I'll back off if you back off. How many of you in this past week said, I wish I had relief? Oh, really? At what cost? I tell you what, you give up being the light, and no more darkness will come into your life. In fact, you'll be victorious over those who have exploited you. Well, I'll make a deal with you. If you don't heal another human being, if you don't fix another mind, if you don't preach another sermon, I'll get you so much money. I'll get you extra of everything that you have. All of the beauty in your life, all of the pleasant, decadent things in your life, I'll give you more of it. And you won't even have to worry about your health. You won't have to worry about any of those things. Just don't help anyone else. Don't heal anyone else. Don't have any more hope. And I'll leave you alone. And that's exactly how it goes. That's exactly the function of it. That's the idea of concealing the light. You can't see light when you're thinking like that. I want relief. I'm so angry at the universe because of all these bad things that have happened to me. It's not right. It's not fair. And yet, every time that you've been told that you're beautiful, that you're handsome, that you're strong, that you're brave, that you have integrity, that you're one of the most amazing people that you have ever been in encounter that they had ever encountered, it's not true to you. They see the very light of Yeshua, the light of the Messiah, the light of Passover within you, and you can't see it because of the concealments. Because of the concealments. Because on this side, there's a concealment, and on this side, there's a concealment so that you miss it. They missed it. Israel missed it. They walked into the wilderness just as bad off as when Pharaoh dealt his blows of oppression and possession. Do you get that? Do you understand that all of this mess that happened over here with the plagues and everything else, which they went through, that's another thing here. It's very important for you to understand that when you call fire down on the nation you're living in, you're going to go through the fire. It's not like he's going to come along and say, okay, you know what? Let's see. We'll throw the economy out of whack because you prayed for it. You wanted this. And then now you're mad because the economy's out of whack. Doesn't work that way. Don't get me wrong. He will make differentiation. If you truly walk in the abundance of the light of the Messiah, the light of Passover, you will definitely be different or differentiated from that which is around you. But that requires you to believe something about yourself that you don't. And so you get to experience the concealments. You never get to actually see the light of Passover. I could teach it to you 100 times. I could teach you every nuance of it, and you still won't see it because you're too caught up in the concealments. So what needs to change? Does the revelation need to happen so that the devil is thrown into the lake of fire and then you'll change? Is that when you'll finally not believe the accuser's information? Because I can propose to you that if what I'm saying about James is true, then we need to re-examine Revelation. And if we need to re-examine Revelation, then all of a sudden the Bible changes, doesn't it? All of a sudden it becomes about the mind and it becomes about the body. Oh, wait, didn't I say something about that before? About how the Holy of Holies has something to do with the mind? has something to do with hormones that cause different emotions that intensify our prayers. Sooner or later, you're going to realize that you're the focal point of everything that's written in that book. And it is not, you were not made for the Bible. The Bible was made for you. You were not made for the Sabbath. The Sabbath was made for you. Passover was made for you. Unleavened bread was made for you. The stars, the moon, the sun, moving how they move was made for you. You're the focal point of everything. All the animals that are on this planet are made for you, not the other way around. Like I said, it's not an easy message. It's not. The concealment creates the shadow. Something has to make sure that the intensification of all power in the universe is not the intensification of all power in the universe, because if it is, we cease to exist. There's this little bit that is not light, that is the function of concealment, which means it will not contain joy. It will not contain hope. It will not contain contentment. It does not promote rest. It does not promote satiety. It promotes hunger. It promotes fear. It promotes all the things that it has to be so that we can experience the righteousness of God. Because if it was just out there and we reject it, then we need to realize that that would cause all of that stuff with Yeshua to happen all over again. And that's what Paul's talking about. We crucify the Son of God afresh. And it is a fearful thing to fall in the hands of a living God. You need to understand now why it's so important that when you've tasted of the light, you've already signed up. When you have poured into another, you've already signed up. And if you've already signed up, there's no backing away, because something is waiting for you. The avenger of blood is waiting for you if you step out of the city of refuge. Does that make sense? All right. Well, tomorrow begins the feast day season. Tonight at sunset, actually. And although it is not a Shabbat, it is a holy convocation. It is a consumption of meats in between the two twilights. It is the focal point. I mean, it is the epicenter of the light of Passover. The same light that resurrected Yeshua from the dead. The same light that resurrected Lazarus before Passover. The same light that overcame the temptation of Christ. The same light that rained manna down from heaven upon the children of Israel. The same light that satiated the thirst. That light. Tomorrow. Tonight at sundown. When there's 3 stars in the sky. The same light that is shooting out the middle of your galaxy is yours to be had. If you can drink that cup worthily, then you can wield the light of the Messiah, the light of Passover. But you will have to overcome the things that make you want to suffer, or the things you have done wrong, and the things that make you think that you are not worthy of the things that you are now experiencing. The concealment pushes back on the light. If you are experiencing concealment, congratulations. That means that you are like him and you are an equal distributor of the light. Because it cannot go out without free will. And that free will has to push back. It has to say no, which means adversity has to come. But adversity is the result of your brain not being who it's supposed to be. I know that's hard to receive. That's hard to get your mind wrapped around, because on the one side, it's a result of the fact that you think you're something that you're not. And on the other side, something has to push back the light. Something has to restrain the light, conceal the truth of what the light actually is. So don't think it's some weird thing that has happened to you. That's what Scripture says, is don't think that it's weird that you fell into trials, but instead realize that you're led away of your own lusts. Blessed is the man who overcomes. And then it has the interesting thing of saying, yes, you got. Let me read this real quick. I know I was about to end, but I want to share this with you from beginning to end. James chapter 1. Consider it all joy, my brethren, when you encounter various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance. And let endurance have its perfect result, so that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. Oh, that's very interesting, isn't it? Those are interesting words. That's shalom. But if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives all generously and without reproach, and it will be given to him. Why? Because he made him who knew no sin to become sin for us, right? But he must ask in faith without any doubting. For the one who doubts is like a surf of the sea, driven and tossed by the wind. For that man ought not to expect that he will receive anything from Yahweh. What is doubt? Doubt is a misbelief about who you are, being a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. But brother of humble circumstances is to glory in his high position. But the brother of humble circumstances is to glory in his high position, and the rich man is to glory in his humiliation, because like the flowering grass, he will pass away. For the sun rises with a scorching wind and withers the grass, and its flowers fall off, and beauty of its appearance is destroyed. So too the rich man in the midst of his pursuits will fade away. Blessed is the man who perseveres under trial, for once he has been approved, he will receive the crown of life, which Yahweh has promised to those who love him. Let no one say when he is tempted, I am being tempted by God, for God cannot be tempted of evil, and he himself does not tempt anyone, but each one is tempted when he is carried away and enticed by his own lust. Then, when lust has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin is accomplished. It brings forth death. Do not be deceived, my beloved brethren. Every good thing given and every perfect gift is from above. Why is he saying that? Why is he saying every good thing and every perfect gift? Because what we desire, and when we create that malevolence, is actually coming to us anyways, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shifting shadow. Do you get that? Do you understand? It is already coming. Because of because of the light of Passover, because of Yeshua's light, because of Yeshua's choice. Mikvud, when he was not unclean. Tempted, when he did not have a Yom Kippur, determined that he needed temptation, and died without any sin. Murdered without any sin. Oh, if you could get the concept of the light of Passover and the concealments, it would blow your mind. It would blow your mind how powerful this really is. It has to push at you. It has to, so that you could see through it to the light of the Messiah. It has to. Shabbat shalom.